Hi, welcome to Lights On, a NeuroMoms Collective podcast. I am Erin Palmer, one of the co-hosts and co-founders of NeuroMoms Collective.
And I'm Amanda Ream,
the other half of the adventure. Today's podcast is really exciting and I'm a little nervous about it. We are actually joined by my son, Dallas.
Hi, everybody.
Dallas is my inspiration behind this whole project and a really special person, not just my life, but kind of in the world. And you're going to find out why. So we're going to talk about his story today. Amanda, we've had some questions about Dallas over the months.
We've talked about Dallas a little bit, shared a little bit about his story. It's so interesting. I've had some of my close friends who know Mackenzie's story have reached out to me and they're like, what's going on with Dallas? What's Dallas's story? So this is a really special time, Dallas, for you to be able to share your story alongside with your mom. I have had the privilege of spending a few days with them, and it has been nothing but a blessing to my heart. So I am so glad to be here with you guys today.
One of us is going to cry. Guarantee it's going to be her, but probably too.
100%.
So Dallas is going to tell you himself about the head injury that brought him to this world. But I will start by telling you that he has aphasia, expressive aphasia. That means that he understands what we're saying to him, but sometimes the way that he responds is slower or he grabs the wrong words, and that is frustrating. And what we've decided to do is normally we edit these podcasts so that we speed up natural breaks in conversation just to make the podcast flow a little bit faster when we're speaking. We have decided that for this podcast, in order for people to experience what your reality is like, we're going to leave those in. With that being said, as always, when we have guests on, sometimes things are said that we decide to edit out, that we feel less comfortable sharing publicly. So we will edit out anything that doesn't go well that Dallas wishes to remove or that we wish to not include in the podcast. And you're in control of that, Dallas.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think it's very authentic. Individuals that have challenges with aphasia, I mean, this is their real life, that they come across people that don't always want to wait for them to be able to express themselves.
Yeah.
And people who want to speak for them. And so I think it's being very authentic and sensitive to that. So anyone that's watching that has experience with aphasia or individuals in their life that struggle with that, we want to be authentic to that also.
Amanda's a speech and language pathologist, Dallas, if you don't remember that. So she really knows what she's talking about. Okay, so here we are in 2026 recording this from Ocean City, Maryland, which is where the three of us are on a little retreat along with some other cool people. Dallas, can you start by telling people what happened to you in 2022, kind of an abbreviated version of that nightmare?
Yeah, August 15, 2022, I was going to the gym and I was benching and I stood up and I got like this. It's like, that's not good. And I collapsed. My Colonel Coots got a call and say, oh, what is it? It's just...
Your colonel called me. Dallas was in the Space Force at the time when he was stationed in Biloxi, Mississippi, and he was on base working out when this happened. And when you collapsed, you had this terrible headache, and you, of course, know everybody. You've always known everybody, and people saw you grab your head in pain and saw you collapse, and they were able to get to you in 10 seconds.
They called the ambulance like 5 minutes. The doctor's in on a call, and they said, we are going to Alabama. Life flighted, Coast Guard to helicopter. The surgery is right there. The skull off, and 7 days, right?
So you spent 7 days in the trauma unit at the Mobile, Alabama hospital, where they took off a portion of your skull cap to relieve the pressure of the swelling. And you had how many brain surgeries there?
2 brain surgeries.
Yeah.
For me was starts with a C, or yes, was a stroke.
So you had a thing called an AVM rupture, which is a lot like a stroke, a massive brain bleed, where a tangle of blood vessels misbehave. It's something that many people have and they're born with, and most people go their whole lives without them rupturing.
Yep.
And you had been diagnosed with an AVM, but they had told you not to worry about it because there's nothing you could do about it, which we now know is not true.
Yeah.
You could have had it coiled and it would have saved you this, and it would have saved the healthcare system about $2.5 million.
Yeah.
But we were told not to bother.
And then we are going to Barrows. We are the pilot and 2 nurses.
2 pilots and 2 nurses. Can I tell them a little bit more about Alabama?
Yeah.
So in Alabama, we had a lot of struggles there. They were at the edge of their capacity for the kind of care they could provide to somebody in Dallas's dire situation. They sent in a chaplain, which is not in support of our faith traditions. They sent in a chaplain for last rites. They said there's no point in trying. And this hospital was so drastically underfunded that when it rained, water came in through the windows. There was never toilet paper in the bathrooms. This was the best care available in the region. And they said not to bother, and we were not comfortable with that. So through the help of your Uncle Scott, we were able to get access to a neurosurgeon in Oregon to review his files, Dr. Jordy Kellogg. He reviewed your files. His child is the exact same age, and he said to us, it doesn't look good. The odds are not strong that he will survive this, but there's only one doctor in the world that I would trust to do this on my child. It's the only doctor in the world qualified to do this surgery, Dr. Michael Lawton, who has an enormous wait list. It's very difficult to get into him, but through the power of community and the reputation that you and our family have, you're much beloved in our community. Dr. Lawton was contacted, your case file was shown to him, and they accepted you as a patient.
I was fit. I was 7% body fat. It's fit 4 miles a day, just running. I was weightlifting, so it's good.
And they said that was important because if you had any comorbidities, if you were unhealthy in any other way, you were so on a razor's edge of surviving that anything else would have been too much for your body to handle.
Yeah.
So then we needed to life flight you. And though he was military, we couldn't get approval that quickly for life flight. So we put our house up as collateral to life flight you. But we had a problem with the airplanes. Do you remember those problems? And by the way, he was in a coma for a long time. So when I say, do you remember, he does not remember a lot of this because he was not aware of most of this.
Storms, right?
So in Alabama, what kind of storms?
Hurricanes, right?
Yeah, they were having big electricals. Pilots couldn't fly in or out of Mobile.
That's one. And then Arizona is kaboobs.
The haboobs, the giant dust storms.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you can't take off or land during those massive dust storms.
But the pilots are good.
So we found 2 combat pilots who were willing to go from, I think, Virginia, and then they flew to Texas and picked up 2 combat medics that were willing to fly in the storm. And then they flew to Mobile, but then you have to wait. You can't just fly. You have to take breaks so you rest. So they took the minimum number of minutes that they needed to, and then they grabbed you and we took off in this med jet that sounds fancy, but it was a little sketch. And they got us through these storms to Arizona.
And thank you for the pilots.
They were amazing.
Yeah.
And in that time, the only pain medication that was available through Alabama was Benadryl. Alabama did not at that time believe in giving pain medication because how many people become addicted to opioids. So he had 2 brain surgeries. He was missing his skull flap and had no pain medication in a very, very turbulent small craft for a cross-country flight.
Yeah.
So at this time, were you out of a coma then?
I was still a coma.
You were coming in and out, but at that point on that flight, you were awake for most of that flight.
Okay.
I was not there.
Okay. But
Right.
you were awake, but not remembering it.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine the level of pain that you were feeling. Wow.
I think his body did a good job of trying to protect him. He doesn't remember most of that.
Yeah. Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. So we got to Arizona, and that was a different experience than Alabama, who, by the way, the nurses in Alabama were unbelievable.
Oh.
I mean, Nurse Carl and his team, unbelievable, because we actually kicked the doctors out at one point because they didn't believe in your ability to survive. but the nurses were amazing. They all called you the baby because you were the youngest patient they'd ever had.
Yeah.
They were all like, I'll take the baby tonight. Like, they loved you. Yeah. They were amazing. So we get to Arizona, Dr. Lawton's team.
And then 5 surgeries.
Yeah.
5 surgeries. And
yeah, you had the big giant AVM resection, and then you had the cranioplasty where they put the skull back on. Once we got the skull back, which we had to fight for, and it was FedEx to us. Talk about that another show. So we got there, and do you remember that you had a feeding tube in?
Yeah. Alabama was right there, and Arizona's like, what's this? And the doctor said, it's a tube.
Yeah, it was such an old type of feeding tube that the nurses in Arizona didn't recognize it as a feeding tube because it was a rigid plastic big tube like the size of a straw. And in Arizona, they use the top of the line, modern, best available. And I say this not to criticize Alabama, but as a point that that's the best healthcare available for people in that community. And that is unacceptable.
Right.
I'm not making fun of them. They were doing the best they could with the tools they had available, and the tools they had available were not good.
Yeah.
So we got to Arizona, and they were actually fighting over your case because it was so exciting to get to do brain surgery on a young, healthy, vibrant person with no comorbidities, because you were the best possible case. If somebody was going to survive this, you were virtually the only person they imagined that could make any sort of a meaningful recovery.
The surgery, who was AVM,
You also had aneurysm clips?
Yeah, the
aneurysm
clips. They said 13% chance of survival rate.
Right, with that surgery, only a 13% chance.
Yeah.
And so it was a really difficult decision for us of what to do, because I knew, as your mom, who knows you better than anybody in the world, that you would not want a small life.
No.
And so one possibility after an AVM rupture is that you stop the bleed, and then that person has a sedentary life for the rest of their lives.
Yep.
That they never can elevate their heart rate, which means, practically speaking, you don't run in a rainstorm. You don't jump out of an airplane. You don't have sex. You don't, like, all these things that people don't want to talk about necessarily, but anything that raises your heart rate is off the table. He was 24. You were 24 when it happened. The idea of the rest of his life not doing things that bring up your heart rate, that bring you exhilaration and joy, I wasn't willing to put you in that environment and wait for you to die, because it would rupture again and you would die.
Yeah.
So we went for it.
Yep. And, I said, let's do it, because 50-50.
You're in or you're out.
Yeah.
What we didn't understand is that the odds of you surviving that, but not having a life with any sort of capacity that marked the way that you would choose to live, we didn't understand how serious that was, what a risk that was.
Yeah.
So when you were having these conversations, you didn't have a lot of time probably to decide, like, do we do the surgery? Do we not?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was probably a lot of like, okay, we did this surgery. Now we have to make another decision. How did that feel?
I was under, and my mom is signing.
So she was just making those decisions.
Yeah.
And I was making those decisions not unilaterally. That's not an accurate way to describe it. But I was getting feedback from my community, from your parenting community, from your dear friends. And we were talking about what would you want. But I was the only one signing off on the paperwork. I ultimately only wanted to be the one accountable or liable if you didn't make it, because you are so beloved in our community and in our family that I knew if you died, that I wouldn't survive that. And I didn't want anybody else to hold the guilt if they were signing off on that. And so it was you and me against the world, right? And that first surgery, the big giant Dr. Lawton surgery, had, I think, 8 neurosurgeons in the room.
Well, one is 10 hours to fit just like one here and two back is just fitting.
So they had to position his skull into a metal holder because the margin of error was the width of one human hair. Mm-hmm. And so they positioned his head, and it took about 2 hours to do that. And they literally screwed his head into place so it couldn't move at all. And that took hours just to set up before the surgery even started.
And the surgery, like 9 hours. Yeah, 9 hours. And then like 10 minutes to clip it.
Yes, the entire surgery is hours and hours and hours long, but the actual process to remove the AVM tangle of vessels and all the mess that was in there, that was about the size of a golf ball in your head. But to add something the size of a golf ball into your brain is insane because it's already all full up in there. So they removed that, and then they also removed the clot that had formed from all the blood that hadn't drained, and that was the mass of a softball. So they removed a golf ball and a softball from his brain. And what kind of physical impairments did you have coming out of that surgery?
I have the right going down. So my right hand up or down to the right calf muscle. And then
you could feel those, or they were paralyzed?
Paralyzed.
Okay.
I didn't speak. I didn't see. Like the tastes are there, but I think
you couldn't see, you couldn't speak, you obviously couldn't walk, you couldn't move yourself, you couldn't sit up, you couldn't swallow. And so you had a feeding tube, a proper feeding tube. Mm-hmm. You could breathe on your own.
Yep.
So you weren't on a vent. And then they started the recovery with you the next day. They started physical therapy and occupational therapy, and you couldn't even sit up.
Yeah.
And they spent hours a day helping you to sit up with Ammon. Hi, Ammon. Your physical therapist who helped you learn how to walk again. Yeah. You didn't like the feeding tube.
I take it out.
How many times did you rip your own feeding tube out?
7.
No, twice. 2 times. So we were like, well, we better pass the fees test, the swallow test. But going paralyzed on your right side was really extra rude because that was your dominant side. So you had to learn to eat with your non-dominant hand, which is extra trouble when you're dealing with swallow because you could only drink liquids like soups and that kind of thing. Yeah. So with your non-dominant hand, friends, when you can't see, I'd like you to try and scoop up some soup and get it into your mouth in a clean way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you started to work on your recovery immediately.
Yep.
And we were there in the Barrow Neurological Institute, let you stay 2 months, which normally they let you stay
4 months. 4 months.
We left there we were there from August to like November. We were there a long time.
Either way.
A long time. And they normally only let people stay a couple of weeks. Yeah. But Dr. Lawton believed in your ability to recover and he let you stay. Okay. So you start to get better and things are going fairly well at Arizona. Yeah. How was your mental health at that point?
It's really bad. Just depression, suicidal ideations. It's a lot. It's a struggle. Dark times, really hard times, but it's been better in California, Palo Alto, California. It's shaping to be better. In Florida, that all went away. Yeah, it's went away. But the dark time, yeah.
Did you think that I had made a mistake by keeping you alive in the beginning?
I don't know.
You just knew you were in pain and you didn't know a way out.
Yeah.
This happened in Mississippi. You were life flighted to Alabama. From Alabama, you went to Arizona. From Arizona, you went to a VA hospital in Texas. From Texas, you went to Mississippi. From Mississippi, you went to Palo Alto, California, to a VA hospital for rehab. Back to Mississippi. Then you went to Destin, Florida for a PTSD program, kind of an anti-suicide program that they run there on base called Intrepid. All of that was going great. And you were doing very, very, very well. And then something happened in 2024. Okay, friends, we're going to pause here right now in this true story that seems like we're making some good headway. Dallas actually has a situation come up in 2024 that sets him all the way back to the beginning. He loses all of his function again. This is a true story and it's a terrible story, but if you're still with us, stick around for part 2 to find out what happened and how his resilience continued to inspire an entire community. Thanks for sticking with us. Keep the lights on.